Hello everyone and welcome to Fallen Angel Customs. How many of you remember Hime's video from last year? I always intended on making a Ouija Lolita based doll to go with her, a prince for the princess, but there never seemed to be a right time or I just couldn't make up my mind. And that's when quarantine hit, and funnily enough it was the exact same time as inspiration hit too, making it the perfect timing. So without further delay, let's get started. After looking around for references on Ouija Lolita fashion, I finally found some male references. It's harder than you would have thought. So, taking inspiration from them and Hime herself, I drew out some pattern pieces to fit a male body, cutting them out of plain white cotton. With the pieces cut out, I decided to tackle the sleeves first, sewing the upper puffed sleeve section to the more fitted lower sleeve. This is where I decided to take some reference off Hime and cracked out the white organza ruffles to add them to the hem of the sleeves, going for a tiered look similar to her underskirt. While I was at it, I also folded the collar piece in half and added a small organza ruffle to the top edge. To give the sleeves some extra puffage, I run a gather stitch along the top edge before sewing it in place to the armhole on the main body of the shirt. I was already feeling the shirt looked a little too plain, so I decided to take a leaf out of my Lolita vibes and added a simple white strip down the front to resemble the buttonhole section of the shirt, adding an organza ruffle on either side and 3 simple pink beads to imitate buttons themselves. Why didn't I put buttons all the way down? Well, that will become much clearer later on. To finish the main part of the shirt, I hemmed the bottom and attached the ruffle collar. Now, I could have left it at this point, but every aristocrat or gentleman in high standing needs a jabot. So, taking a pink half-pearl gem, I carefully glued some yellow embroidery thread around it to create the look of a brooch. I would have used gold, but I didn't have any. However, I do have gold paint, so instead painted the yellow thread gold before allowing it to dry. I cut 2 small rectangles, one smaller than the other, before hemming all 3 sides. When I first gathered and laid them together and placed them against the shirt, they looked too plain and just blended into the rest of the shirt, so I mixed up a pearly pastel pink acrylic with my paints and carefully painted a thin line along the bottom of each piece, in a similar fashion to how I painted the ribbon detail on Yumi's outfit. With the paint dry, I sewed the jabot pieces together before sewing them onto the shirt at the collar, using the gem to hide the point where they connected, as well as accent the jabot. After testing the fit on the doll, I carefully used a ladder stitch to close up the back. I decided for a short that I wanted to make some puffy ones, a little like breeches. So, using a template I used for Hime's bloomers, I scaled it up and altered the shape a little so that they would fit a male doll, also extending the top section so they would be a high-waisted style, which is the reason why I didn't add imitation buttons all the way down the front of his shirt. With the pieces cut out, I sewed the side seams together, taking some pink ribbon which I had left over from working on Hime, and sewed a strip down over the side seams, hiding them under the ribbon. Putting right side spacing, I sewed up the inside seam and added a loosely gathered blue organza along the bottom hem, leaving the thread loose for the time being, before sewing both legs together of the centre seam, so that they became a pair of shorts rather than 2 separate legs, finishing it off by hemming the top edge after turning them the right way out. Time to slip on those shorts and add some stuffing to help them hold their shape. I had to be really careful not to overstuff them because then they just stuck out awkwardly. Remember the loose thread from the ruffles at the bottom? It's time to put them to use, by gently pulling on them so they pull the bottom hem in tight, causing the organza to ruffle more as well as prevent the padding in the shorts from coming loose or falling out. With the shorts finished, I used the ladder stitch to close up the opening at the back. Very early on, I decided I wanted a tailcoat styled waistcoat, and after 8 or 9 attempts, I actually remembered I had a jacket in a similar style from a couple of years ago when I made my Jack Skellington custom. So I took to rifling through my pattern pieces until I found the main body of the pattern piece, drawing it on a larger scale so that it would fit a male body, since originally it was created for a Skeleta doll. With the pattern sorted, I cut it out twice, once in fabric and the other in lining, since the underside of the tails will be visible, so I wanted to hide the rough edge from the sewing of the hems later on. With the pieces cut out, I sewed together the side seams of both pieces before layering them together. I decided to add a white lace which had a bit of sparkle to add to his Lolita based look, placing it along the bottom edge of the waistcoat, taking my time as I sewed it down, as I was also sewing the lining in place at the same time, adding a cute little bow at the back of his waistcoat, at the point where it splits to form the tails, and hemming the armholes to give a clean, finished edge. With the waistcoat almost finished, I slipped it onto the doll, sewing it shut at the front with yet another ladder stitch, before taking some more half-pearl gems that I used to make the brooch and to form the buttons in the front. It was at this point I began to have doubts about his finished look, but I kept moving on, thinking it was because he wasn't completed yet. For his shoes, I originally planned on using these monster high male shoes, carving off the skull on the sides and giving a fresh coat of paint, but once they were finished and I tried them on him, I instantly hated them. They just didn't look right or work with the rest of his outfit, which I was already having doubts over. And this is where his whole look got a massive alteration. His finished outfit was in front of me beside Hime while I worked on the other parts, and I just began to hate it more and more. Something just didn't look right, and I couldn't work out what the problem was. So I turned to a couple of my friends for their opinions, because I was at a loss of what to do. After their helpful feedback, I felt ready to continue and make the changes I needed to make me happy with him once more. So, returning to work on him, I set out to make some shoes that would work much better with his new and altered look. I started out by tracing around the sole of the existing, repainted factory shoe, made it a little bit smaller, and taking my male sock pattern base, which is just an upscaled version of my female one, cut them out of a white jersey fabric, and also cut along the fold, stopping once it was just in line with where the heel began. I started by sewing the back seams before moving on to hemming the front opening, which will hold the laces for the front of the boots. This is where I decided I didn't like the white fabric soles, so I scrapped them and turned to craft foam and card, cutting out 2 pieces of each. I slipped the boot bases onto his feet, held the foam sole to the bottom of his foot before sewing all the way around, attaching the body of the boot to the soles, gluing the card on the very bottom to cover up the stitches on the underside of the foam to give them a smoother look. In the same fashion that I wrapped embroidery thread around the gem to create the brooch, I wrapped it around the edge of the shoe, gluing it in place, using it to hide the line between the foam and the card, using it to even it out before giving it a couple of even coats of white. With the white bases finished and dried, I painted the soles a pale pink, which matches the ribbon and the pink detailing and the gold around the edge of the boot over the thread. Deciding I wanted to pink for the laces, I took a red pen and measured out lace spacings on each boot, making it even on both sides before threading pink embroidery thread in a crisscross fashion up the boots. Last minute I decided to make some little white socks, partly to make the boots look less transparent, but also to mimic the look of the tongs on the boot under the laces, in case there was a gap that just showed through. I created his crown in the same way I created Hime's. I cut 2 shortened pieces of ribbon and 1 longer one, as well as a small foam circle to be the base. I also cut 2 pieces of wire, the same length of the shorter pieces of ribbon. I glued the wires to the shorter ribbons before taking the longer length of ribbon, gluing it all the way around the outer edge of the foam circle. I placed a pin through the centre of the foam to give myself something to hold on to while I worked on attaching the shorter ribbons to the inside edge of the crown on one side. I also bundled up a piece of organza into a ball ready to fill the centre after I glued down the other end of the shorter ribbons. I ended up taking the wires off them because they just kept peeling away from the ribbons, and remembering how much trouble they gave me when I made Hime's crown, I just decided I would find a way to make it work without the wire, which I did. I removed the pin before I glued the organza in the middle of the crown, and then placed the pin in the centre of where the shorter ribbons crossed, through the organza and out the bottom of the foam, using the pin to push the middle of the ribbons down to give a slight curved effect on the ribbons, while giving me a way to attach the crown to his head. Now for a finishing touch. More half pearls, this time in white. I used smaller ones around the band of the crown, and a slightly larger one on the top to hide the top of the pin. For his face, I started with my pastels, using blue and grey tones to contour and define his moulded features. Luckily for me, Slo-mo has really chiselled features, which really helped in this process. Once I was happy with the pastels, I turned to my pencils and to start to add in the finer details such as his eyebrows and eye placement. Deciding to give him blue eyes to match Hime, but also made them a darker shade to help them stand out better against his bluer skin tone. As I'm happy with each layer, I seal to save my progress, going back in with more pastels to help blend everything together, while slowly going in with darker and darker colours to add more and more definition to his eyes and his eyebrows, even to the inner line of his lips. I actually discovered while doing this that Slo-mo has a half smile, which I just couldn't help but to really accent and add to his look. I ended up resorting to white acrylic for the whites of his eyes though, because I realised from the start that it would take an extremely long time to build up the white pigment against the blue of his skin. Once the final layer of MSC is dried, I add highlights to his eyes with white acrylic before glossing them. Using West from the same yarn I used for Hime, I decided to follow Slo-mo's natural hairline, though instead of it going straight up, I'm going to have it sweep over to one side, so I set to work layering the weft in the usual fashion, covering up the upper section of his head. With the lengthy part of his hair done, I twisted and tied it up into a little top knot to keep it out of the way while I set to work on flocking. I made flock from the scrap pieces of the yarn left over from me making his wefts. I worked in sections, placing the glue in one section, applying the flock, before moving to another section and repeating the process until I had fully flocked the lower section of his head. I let the glue dry overnight before returning to work on it the next day, carefully removing the excess flock, using my fingers for the larger chunks and a toothbrush for the smaller ones. I actually had to redo this step because I wasn't happy with how it originally turned out. Thankfully, it was easy enough to peel it off, though I had to be very careful that I didn't squish his head and crack the MSC in the process. Time to let down that man bun and get to styling. Originally, I wanted his head to sweep over to one side and form into one curl at the end, but no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't get it to work or look how I wanted it to. So it was on to plan B. I separated his hair into 3 sections to help me layer his hair properly, cutting each section and feathering them, using some water with a clean toothbrush to help me style and encourage it to lay how I wanted it to. Doesn't he look cute with his little crown? Definitely worth struggling through. Are you ready to see his finished look? I know Hime is. I'd like to introduce you all to Prince. So I'm much happier with how he looks now compared to the original outfit. I changed his shorts from being puffy to just normal shorts and brought in his waistcoat to be much more fitted, and overall he looks so much sleeker and more regal compared to the strange, out of proportion look his puffy shorts and loose waistcoat gave him. And don't they look so perfect together? Needless to say, I think Hime approves of her Prince, don't you? Thank you so much for joining us in this rollercoaster journey. And remember to stay safe. I'll see you in the next video. Until next time!
Look at that little pink tongue. He's so cute. Oh, baby boy. He's such a cutie. He's so cute. Oh.